Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Book of Kings, where we discuss topics such as history, religion, philosophy, culture, and more, and the way that they all interact with each other. Don't forget to like, leave a comment, subscribe, and hit the bell icon to receive a notification every time I release a new video. Hope you enjoy. All right, everybody. Here we are. We are back for another video. The topic of this video is piggybacking off of a previous topic. One of the previous topics of discussion was the concept of clinal variation, which highlights the gradual differences and changes in the physical appearance and genetics of human beings, and which is almost a counter to the concept of a few primary quote-unquote races in the world that are separated into discrete categories. What I talked about before would say that the changes are so gradual, where does one start and end, and where does the other one begin? So this video, I'm going to be talking about how I think one starts and begins. And the factor that I believe has largely determined how large populations of people have been grouped together as one single quote-unquote race is civilization, which would include ideology/belief systems, which I've referred to in previous videos as comprising religion and or philosophy. It may also be determined to a lesser extent by language and culture, which may at times overlap with civilization and ideology. So, there are various different theories regarding how many different races there are and what races those are, but for the sake of this video, we're going to talk about more in common vernacular, or common understanding, what are considered to be the different racial categories, and what are the origins of our conceptualizations of these categories. So how we're first going to get into that is we're going to talk about Europe. So Europe is usually significant in topics of race and culture and ethnicity because Europe is considered the indigenous homeland of what would be considered the white race, if there even can be believed to be such a thing. So, let's first ask, what is Europe? So, if we talk about the other continents, what a continent is a continent is supposed to be a large piece of land geographically separated from other large pieces of land. So, let's take Australia, for example. Australia is pretty much just a big island. So clearly it's separated from other large pieces of land. Then let's take Africa. It's connected to the Sinai Peninsula by a hair connected to Asia, but it's pretty much a largely separate piece of land. North America and South America, they're clearly separate from the old world, Asia, Africa, Europe, by huge oceans, the Atlantic Ocean and the Pacific Ocean, and also from one another. Yeah, they're connected right at the tip, the Panama Canal, they're connected, but they're largely separate aside from being connected by a hair. But now what about Europe and what about Asia? Well, they're clearly separate from North America, South America, Africa, Australia. But what really separates Asia from Europe? Well, that has perplexed people for quite a while. It would seem like not a lot separates them. They're largely connected. Like I said before, Africa is connected to Asia by a little small piece of land, but Europe and Asia are connected by huge long pieces of land. So where are they separated? Now, generally in geography, what's considered to be the dividing lines between Europe and Asia are the Caucasus Mountains, which are in southern Russia, the country of Georgia, Armenia, Azerbaijan. And then anything north of the Caucasus Mountains is considered part of Europe. Anything south of it is considered part of Asia. The other dividing line is the Ural Mountains, which separates the European portion of Russia from the Asian portion of Russia, which is Siberia. And that's a long mountain range from the North Pole all the way down to the Caspian Sea. But if we look at it, they don't look largely separated, right? It almost seems arbitrary. So it would seem almost that somebody arbitrarily drew these lines. So what did separate Europe from Asia? Well, I'm going to answer that. And I'm largely going to say civilization. Well, what's civilization? We've talked about in other videos. It means having a written language. It means having a written perspective on life, a written code of morals or ethics or philosophy or way of thinking about things. So I would say it's civilization that separated Europe from Asia. Now, what civilization would that be? Well, we frequently hear the term Western civilization. So what has separated Europe from Asia and then Africa and other regions was Western civilization. So the main dividing line between these regions was that Europe was the place where Western civilization dominated society. So what exactly is Western civilization? We hear that a lot. Well, in essence, what Western civilization is largely a combination of two completely separate and unrelated philosophies which have been connected together. And that is Greek philosophy and Christianity. So they've been connected. How they became connected is a whole nother video in and of itself. But as we know it right now, Western civilization is largely Greek philosophy and Christianity together. And initially, how all that started, even before Christianity was in the picture, Western civilization was based upon Greek philosophy. Greek philosophy began in Athens in the Greek Golden Age and then spread to the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire patronized Greek philosophy. So it's largely said that Western civilization is rooted in Greek philosophy. Now then in time, the Romans adopted Christianity. So that's the beginning of when you saw these two being combined together. But largely, Western civilization is Greco-Roman philosophy, Greco-Roman civilization and culture mixed with Christianity. So Europe is the place where Western civilization and Christianity, where that's the dominant ideology, that's the dominant civilization. Well, how does this relate to the theory of race, or particularly the European race, the white race, etc.? Well, we're talking about how does Europe separate from Asia? Well, it separates because Europe is the homeland of Western civilization. So in essence, we ask all people, there's gradual differences in their appearance and their genetics. There's no clear point where one stops and the other begins, right? So where do we draw the line to separate these into separate categories? Well, I would say we separate them based upon civilization. So the people from the region, which is dominated by Western civilization, is almost viewed as their own macro group, their own macro category, their own race per se, right? And anything outside of that group is considered a different macro group, different macro category. So anybody who would believe in the concept of a European race or a white race or etc. would believe that, let's say, somebody from Turkey, they would not be European, they would not be white. Somebody from the Middle East, somebody from North Africa, they would not be European, they would not be white. But there are a lot of fair-skinned Middle Easterns. People in Turkey are very fair-skinned. There's a lot of people in northern Iran who are very fair-skinned. A lot of people in northern Afghanistan who are very fair-skinned. A lot of people in Algeria are very fair-skinned. And also conversely, there's some people in Europe who are actually tan-skinned. A lot of Italians have very tan skin. Spanish and Portuguese people, a lot of them have tanner skin. Greek people have tan skin. A lot of people in other parts of the Balkans, Yugoslavia, Serbia, Bulgaria, Romania, have tan skin and dark hair, of course. So some people from the quote-unquote Middle East and North Africa might look almost the same as somebody from Southern Europe. As I said in the previous video, where do you draw the line between a Spaniard and a Moroccan? Where do you draw the line between a Greek and a Turk? Well, you draw the line at civilization, right? Europe follows Western civilization. That's the kind of marriage of Greco-Roman philosophy and culture and Christianity. And then the Middle East and North Africa, that follows a different civilization. That is Islamic civilization. So we hear a lot now, people are talking about adding a new category for race in the U.S. Census, and that being the Middle Eastern North African category. Well, what would make all of these regions one cohesive category? That I would also say is civilization. That is Islamic civilization. North Africa, the Middle East, Central Asia, even parts of South Asia, Pakistan, they are part of Islamic civilization. So that is one way where these groups that appear to have a gradual difference in their appearance, that's how we drew a line in the sand and separated one from another based upon these civilizations. Let's talk about another civilization. We're going to say Asian civilization. Asian is considered its own race, but we're talking about how are these concepts of races connected to civilization? Well, just like Western civilization is the combination of Greco-Roman philosophy and Christianity, well, East Asian civilization is the marriage of Confucianism and or Taoism and or Buddhism. So, for example, China, which is the root of Taoism and Confucianism, their society traditionally, not anymore because now we're under a current communist regime, but that's a whole other topic. Their society is dominated by the trinity of Confucianism, Taoism, and Buddhism. And then if you go to Korea, there's also that same trinity. Japan, there's also that same trinity. I would also kind of throw in Shintoism in there as well. Vietnam largely historically has had that same trinity, Confucianism, Taoism, Buddhism. And there are other countries which maybe have had one but not the other. For example, Thailand is primarily dominated by Buddhism, and a lot of the other countries nearby, even if they don't explicitly follow Taoism, Confucianism, or Buddhism, have had a large influence from Chinese civilization. For example, Philippines, they're Catholic, right? So they could largely be lumped more with Western civilization, but there's been a large influx of Chinese traders into the Philippines over the course of history, and that's largely had an influence on their society. So in a way, we could say that this whole concept of there being an Asian race is largely connected to civilization as well, and that is the civilization of Buddhism, Taoism, and Confucianism. So let me give you another example of the dividing line between one large group of people and another being set by civilization and belief system. Let's take Central Asia. Central Asia consists of Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, and Kyrgyzstan. So the people of these regions have varying phenotypes, varying physical appearances, from Middle Eastern to European to East Asian, and some combination between. So not a lot of people in this country even know a whole lot about Central Asia, but oftentimes when people are acquainted with it, they tend to lump it culturally, socially, racially with the Middle East. However, these people do largely have, genetically and in physical appearance-wise, they have a lot of East Asian genetics. So why is it being lumped in with the Middle East? Well, it's being lumped in with the Middle East because the dominant religion is Islam. So again, they have varying physical appearances to varying degrees, but they have some certain cultural and religious similarities with the Middle East. So they, despite having a mixed appearance, the line in the sand is drawn, as in these people are not East Asian, but they are part of the broader Islamic culture or Islamic civilization. And that's another example of how different does a Uzbek look from a Western Mongolian, or a Kyrgyz from a Tibetan. But the people of Central Asia are considered to be more aligned with the Middle East as opposed to East Asia because they are Islamic, and the people of these regions which are considered more East Asian are considered East Asian because they belong to civilizations that include some combination of Confucianism, Taoism, or Buddhism. Okay, so that's another example. Let me give you another example of a dividing line. Largely in our speech, a lot of times we hear the term East Asian Pacific Islander, but oftentimes Pacific Islanders are almost considered kind of semi-separate from East Asians. And of course they do have kind of a mixed physical appearance of like East Asian with almost Native Australian or Melanesian appearance. However, they do look quite similar to some groups from Southeast Asia, such as potentially people from the Philippines, potentially people from Indonesia or Malaysia. So why are Pacific Islanders separated from East Asia? Well, specifically, like I said, civilization. They do not patronize Buddhism. They do not patronize Confucianism. They do not patronize Taoism, either any one of these individually or in combination. So they're separated under what we consider quote-unquote racial lines because of differences in civilization and culture. And largely, I've been talking about how it's largely based upon their religion or philosophy. Traditionally, the people of the Pacific Islands have not had a unified ideology or religion historically. So the unifying feature has then been drawn more to culture and language. So the concept of a Pacific Islander as like a macro group is largely based upon Polynesian culture and more broadly language. Polynesian, as we talked about in a previous video, is a branch of the Austronesian language family. So these peoples are grouped together because they do not have the same cultural ideology that East Asia does, and they're unified by a language branch. Let's give some more examples. South Asia. Now, South Asia is in close proximity to the Middle East. There's been a lot of cultural exchange between these two regions throughout the course of history. Some may even say that there are physical similarities between the people of these two regions. However, South Asia is considered a separate, almost macro group or racial category from the Middle East or Europe or etc. So where's the line drawn? And I would say the line again is drawn on lines of civilization. So while the Middle East is largely part of Islamic civilization, South Asia is largely based upon, I want to say in a very simplified way, would be Hinduism. But if I want to speak even more broadly, I would say Vedic civilization or Dharmic civilization as a whole. Because not all people of South Asia or even India are Hindu. There's also a lot of Sikhs. There's also even some Jains and even some Buddhists. I know we talked about Buddhism in relation to East Asia, but largely all these ideologies are all connected. And one could even make the argument that they can all be lumped together as one broader civilization. The Hindus and Sikhs both believe in the authority of the Veda scriptures. And even while Buddhists and Jains don't believe in the Veda scriptures, they do believe in the concepts of dharma and reincarnation, etc. And South Asia has largely operated until very recently under the caste system. So it can be considered that this is what can be labeled as Vedic or Dharmic civilization. And of course, there are a great number of Muslims in the Indian subcontinent and in India. However, of course, the majority of people of that region belong to the various Vedic or Dharmic religions that I had already described. So again, we're talking about where does one group stop and the other begin? Well, where is the line drawn? I would say again, the line is drawn. Middle East would be the civilization of Islam, and South Asia is Dharmic civilization. Now, one issue of contention which somebody might bring up is Pakistan. Pakistan is considered South Asia. Pakistan in the U.S. Census and in just common speech is associated more with South Asia, is related more to India rather than to the Middle East. However, Pakistan is Muslim. So I would say my answer to that is, while according to the U.S. Census and common speech in the West, Pakistan is associated with India because it previously was part of India. It was part of the British Raj. People from Pakistan themselves consider themselves having more in common with the people of the Middle East, North Africa, and Central Asia. So I would say that theory would still hold true. People of Pakistan would self-identify more as, aligning with Middle Eastern. Some of them would even say that they're Middle Eastern. So we've talked about various different civilizations and quote-unquote racial categories or groups. So that's largely how I would say the groups I discussed came to be viewed as distinct macro or racial categories separate from other groups. If you notice that there are some groups that I haven't discussed yet, don't worry. This is only part one of a two-part series, and we're going to discuss these groups in my next video. We're also going to discuss how arbitrary and fluctuating the categorization of such groups and the concept of distinct races in general has been throughout history. Additionally, we're going to talk about some exceptions to the rule regarding what we've discussed so far. So stick around, because all of this will be discussed in part 2, which is coming very soon. Thank you for watching. This has been another Book of Kings video. Don't forget to like, leave a comment, subscribe, and hit the bell icon to receive a notification every time I release a new video.